Welcome back to The Remote Life. My name is Talbot, also known as Han Meets World, and in this episode I want to talk about what it actually means to be a digital nomad, my own personal relationship with digital nomading, and why this might actually be the end of my digital nomad chapter. So grab a coffee, a tea, or something stronger, and let's get started. So this podcast was never meant to be a digital nomad podcast. I was very clear from the start. This podcast began as the Remote Worker podcast, and I switched that pretty quickly after series 1 when I realised that actually if I was going to continue this little podcasting project, it was never going to be just about work. It was always going to be about life and creating that freedom lifestyle for yourself as well. And again, for me, the whole calling it a digital nomad podcast never sat right for me. I couldn't fully tell you why at the time, but I can probably tell you now. And that is that despite being around digital nomad concepts, projects, everything for, well, at least the best part of a decade at this point, I've never fully felt like the term digital nomad was something that was part of my identity. And this last chapter of travels has made that abundantly clear to me. I just spent the last 3 to 4 months traveling a lot quicker than I would perhaps have liked, but I knew that I had to get really clear on some business goals and also personal goals. I'm still sort of questioning back in the summer whether this was the lifestyle that I wanted for myself moving forward. And so I did a bit quicker traveling than was good for my health. I got sick about 3 times, and then I had a weird swollen throat and woke up with full body aches for about 24 hours while I was in Kuala Lumpur. And it just made so much very abundantly clear to me that being a digital nomad was never a goal for me. It was never something that I really intended for myself. But I am in this period right now of my business where I'm incredibly grateful that people are looking for my views and opinions on what it means to be a digital nomad or a digital nomad creator. And I feel like I just need to come out and share where I'm at with that too. So to give a bit of context, I've been on off remote for about 11 years. I feel like you might argue that, okay, no, like you were at university, you can't possibly have been remote at the time. But I kind of feel like I was, because at the end of the day, I was given a grant when I was studying abroad in Brazil to create content about my study abroad experience. And that was where I started discovering on a really chilly winter day different people who were creating content and making money from being what we now know to be YouTubers and content creators. I said to a friend at the time, I was like, I'm going to create a career out of social media. And she said, how? And I had no idea. But I used that blog to then build a portfolio of different social media jobs, which then led to me using a social media campaign to secure my first job out of university, which was in communication strategy. Fast forward a year, I then also opened Han Meets World so I could continue sort of talking more about how I basically didn't want to go into an office and do the traditional corporate route that I felt like a lot of us at university were sort of being funneled towards at the time. So it became a really great way for me to showcase that I could build a website, I could build social media, and that I didn't have to be alone. That if people didn't want to do that, they didn't have to either. Which led me to this project that I basically shaped for myself about a year after I graduated from university, where I looked into doing the communication strategy for a particular department at the university I worked at the time, and then fell into this sort of rabbit hole of spaces, people building their own work and also working from co-work spaces in beautiful places that weren't a traditional corporate office. And the whole point of this project was to build a communication strategy. But then I started understanding that one of the biggest things also was a lack of space to build businesses. To which a friend at the time then told me about people called digital nomads, and she had worked with somebody who was a digital nomad the summer beforehand. And I was like, wait, what is this? And there was literally no Google definition for this kind of person, but she told me about these people who were going to different amazing co-work spaces and building their own thing or working a remote job, which to me was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. There are other people who are thinking like me. They aren't doing the kind of typical thing that we've been told that we have to do. And I left that. I remember putting that in my project, and for myself, I even opened up this Instagram account called Step Into My Office, where I would literally go around different cafes in Southampton and London and find different places that had Wi-Fi where I could work and do my meetings or do my like documents or whatever it was I was working on, because that was all the way before Google actually was useful in that respect. So, and it was not heard of to have Wi-Fi while you were having your coffee. So for me, that was one of my first sort of real entry points into understanding what digital nomads were. And there were some creators I remember who were doing a trend called 1 second of my day for a year after I quit my 9 to 5 or something like that. Oh no, it was I quit my 9 to 5 to go travel the world, and it was like a 300, was it literally a whole minute or something, or 365 days in seconds a day. And there were some creators that I actually from that trend went on to work with, which they will probably have no idea as well, but I was like, no, okay, these people were called the digital nomads, and I was fascinated by what they were doing. But it was basically people doing what the travel YouTubers that I loved watching were doing, but they called themselves digital nomads. They were people who could take their work and travel full time. And so I was fascinated. And while I stayed in London for the next 3 to 4 years, basically working different social media jobs, and I was able to also incorporate working remotely within some of these contracts too. I was incredibly lucky that I had some managers that were very understanding that their Wi-Fi was terrible, so I went off to work at home, or I would go to different spaces. And at this point also the girl boss trend had taken off, so there were so many different spaces also opening up that were kind of intended more as female entrepreneur spaces only. And being in content myself at the time, I was then invited to go check out these spaces, where I'd then meet even more people who were working remotely while building their businesses. And it just opened up this amazing world of innovative people that I didn't know also existed. So I honestly took my sweet time into going fully remote, and also then traveling as we now know digital nomads. But it was always in the back of my mind. Like, I literally created whole panels on how to be a digital nomad for an event that I project managed back in 2019. I was literally going to different events to research what this looked like, so that I could then take it back for my work that I was doing in 2019, 2020. And then all the while negotiating my own contracts. So rather than going full-time remote and going fully digital nomad, I went freelance first. I took back control of my work and how I worked. And because basically I'd kind of had this year where I was going to an office that I felt like that's where my creativity went to die. It was honestly a year where I've had the nicest looking job and life from the outside, but I was the most depressed I've honestly felt. And so I was like, no, I'm going freelance. I'm going to take back control. I want to have autonomy over my work. I want to be able to fully work how I need to. And that's exactly it. For me, it was always about having the flexibility to work and live how I want to live my life as I wanted to, and not how I was being told that I should, or sort of being groomed, if you will, into doing for however many years at that point. But I always worked on these little digital nomad projects because I love the idea of introducing more and more conversations around how to live life on your own terms. I then worked on different projects through the pandemic that allowed me to work remotely, and of course we knew that eventually the lockdowns were going to be lifted and we would be coming out of lockdown. And so I started looking at, okay, what do I want for myself? And I really wanted to keep exploring this digital nomad community and space. But I still didn't feel like I was a digital nomad. I was talking more and more about my own lifestyle and what I was planning for, my accessories and what I was going to go do. And I had people messaging me going, hey, how do I get a remote job? How do I go live a digital nomad lifestyle? And I was like, I don't feel like I can answer these questions, despite having been around digital nomad conversations professionally for about 5 years at that point. Yeah, we were coming out of lockdowns around 2021. So I created this podcast, and you may know this from having listened to a few episodes already, but I created the podcast largely so I could answer people's questions about how to find a remote job or different ways to live. But I was always adamant about the fact that it was the remote life. It was not the digital nomad life. Even that I switched it very quickly from the remote worker to the remote life. because I love the idea that we were talking about life, whether that was somebody who worked and travelled full time or was somebody who wanted to live in a specific destination while also working a remote job for completely full time, not even for short periods. And I never expected the podcast to go far. I just wanted to have this space, and I never podcasting was never on my bucket list either. I never thought I'd be a podcaster, but it just became this really amazing platform and way to talk more about what it means to build your own lifestyle. And there was demand after the first 6 episodes of the podcast to keep talking about it. Like it was literally meant to be a 6-episode side project that then sort of catapulted me in a way into this amazing remote work and life space. And it allowed me to have so many amazing conversations with people about how they are living their life on their own terms. And I was meeting people who, without the internet, without the remote work and life spaces, I would probably never have crossed paths with ever. And yeah, the projects that I was so incredibly grateful, and still am so incredibly grateful for the amazing projects and programs I've had the privilege of being a part of, from working on different tourism projects to keynotes at amazing creator events in London. But all the while, I've kind of had it in the back of my mind that talking about how to become a digital nomad or talking about digital nomad tourism projects, if I'm being honest, it always felt like it was just the most palatable term to talk about what it was that I really wanted to talk about. For me, I've never been somebody who wanted to go somewhere and treat it like a laundry list. I would go do a country. I really can't stand it when we say like, oh, I want to go do the specific destination, or we haven't done this destination yet. I don't really like how that, and you could sell semantics hand, like chill, but for me it's always been more important to go places that bring me joy, that I resonate with, and to really go places and feel like you've actually been there. You've really taken the time to have a coffee, or you speak. For me, I've been learning languages for literally more than 2/3 of my life at this point, and language has always been such a important part of how I travel. So I feel like I can really get to connect with places that I choose to go to. And to be completely truthful, I feel like now, especially in 2024, digital nomading has become a concept that I never really intended to be fully part of. I'm not going to go down what I think it's kind of become for me, because I'm sure there'll be people who disagree. This is all about talking about my perspective and why I feel like being a digital nomad was never something that I intended to be. It just like, for example, I could be slightly biased coming from the content creator space, where in 2018 people started referring to people who make money online as influencers. Well, if you're someone who worked in marketing pre-2018, you know that influencers could be anybody. They could be an actress, they could be a local head teacher, they could be the mum who runs the church newsletter. Like that was never really the intended word for influencers. Like the benchmark for an influencer was never about how many followers they have online. But for some reason that seems to be the term that is most used when talking about somebody who makes money through creating content online. And I feel like that's sort of what a digital nomad has become synonymous. I don't know. For me, it has the same feeling now, talking about whether you're a digital nomad or not. Whether that's because digital nomads were blamed for the over-tourism in the summer, and I don't really agree with that statement, by the way. But for me, I don't really resonate with how the term digital nomad has been taken on by mainstream media, how it's been taken on by the majority now for their life. And again, it's just simply a difference in how I identify myself and what my values and my goals are for my own life. While it might have been easy to call these visas digital nomad visas, I feel like now the visas themselves aren't actually targeted towards how we know digital nomads to be now. I would say that they are perhaps more, maybe it just sounds sexier to call them digital nomad visas, but I would say that digital nomad visas themselves are intended for slow travellers, they're intended for remote workers, they're intended for people who want to slow down and get to really know a place. They're not necessarily for people who are looking for essentially the modern backpacking experience. working and traveling on the go and not staying somewhere for too long. So I guess that's exactly it. It comes down to, for me, it was never about becoming a digital nomad. And I'm very picky about who I also allow to speak on the podcast, because again, this isn't a digital nomad podcast. Yes, digital nomading is part of remote life, don't get me wrong, but the point was to be able to talk to different people who have different ways of living their own life. The point was to empower people to live their own remote life dreams, not to present one view of how to do things. I've used this podcast to be able to discover how I can also make my own life work for myself. Talking to different people who have nomadic families, who are building businesses and not doing it the traditional route. There's so many different ways to live this amazing life, and the whole idea of this podcast was to talk to different people who also have remote something going on for them in their life. And so then to be kind of asked to talk about things as a digital nomad now, to be referred to as a digital nomad creator, despite the fact that I don't have digital nomad creator written anywhere in my bios or in my profiles. The idea is that I don't want to be somebody who is known for championing what we now know as the digital nomad lifestyle. If it's something that is important to you, then amazing. If there's been a story that you've heard that has empowered you to become a digital nomad yourself, amazing. I'm so glad, and I would love to hear about it. But for me, there's a reason I took my sweet time about trying on digital nomading. For me, it was always about being able to choose where I work from, and I'm so glad and so grateful that I've been able to meet amazing people in this remote community. But I also miss things like having a community in real life too. I miss being able to say hi to different people who work in shops, or knowing that there are events that are not necessarily for digital nomads, to also be other people who have similar interests that are not digital nomad related as well. Being able to come home and knowing that I can find all the different bits and pieces I need for my content or for my wardrobe, or to go stand up paddleboarding whenever I fancy it without having to worry about going into my family's space. It's all these little things that I am just missing from my life now. And again, I know, good problems to have, but that was exactly it. The remote life was always about building a life of my dreams. It was about building a life that works for me. It was about choosing my problems. I know that sounds weird, but it was always about having the flexibility and the freedom to build life on my own terms. So what does that look like moving forward for me? It looks like, again, slowing the travels down big time. If you've been following along my social media accounts and my blog posts, you'll know that I've talked a bit about finding my remote base and what that looks like, but it does look like me finding a base. I feel so grateful and lucky for what I've been able to experience on this digital nomad chapter, working and travelling full time. And the podcast is at the moment still going to keep going and exploring what it means to have a remote life. But for me, I am just ready to put down some roots somewhere again and build up a community in a space that resonates with me. And I'm just ready to have a bit more of a routine. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I miss being able to, be mindful of my health. Yes, you can make it work on the road, 100%. I just can't. If I'm being really honest, I am just not somebody who could make it work. I like to have my routine where I can build up these health goals, and I can build up my kitchen of bits and pieces that I can make and cook and not worry about having to clear out the Airbnb or whatever it is for the next thing. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. For me, again, remote life was never something that was meant to be part of my identity. It was always something that was meant to be something I do and something that is a value of mine. And that's exactly it. The travel as well. My business is always going to be centered around travel. I'm always going to love travel. I love the travel industry. I love being able to talk about how we can mindfully travel and create content. These are all things that I love so much and will continue to talk about. But I don't want to make digital nomading specifically my identity. That was never meant to be my long-term plan. So it's going to look a lot slower. Hands not going anywhere. I am so excited to build the remote creatives properly as well, and maybe that needs another episode too. But that's exactly it. I want to be able to have a space that is mine, to be able to know that I can put something down and not come back to it for 3 months if I don't want to. And I want to be able to build these businesses and have the headspace that I felt like I wasn't having all the while I was traveling and trying to plan for the next thing, or trying to adjust to different cultures and climates, all while also trying to balance my business and just clear my head. Honestly, coming back and being in the UK right now, my head is so refreshingly clear because I'm not thinking about, okay, right, I've got to go out and get content, I've got to go plan for where I'm going to stay in 2 days, or make sure that I've done XYZ, just I felt like I've done a place. And no, it looks like just being so mindful and falling back in love with what I do as well. I think that's exactly it. Again, I'm so grateful and lucky that I could fast travel as I did, but I'm so looking forward to also being able to take my time and research and to really get to know things properly again. And yeah, that's exactly it. And I hope you'll continue to join the journey with me. For me, it was always about building a remote lifestyle. It was always about going places and connecting meaningfully with things. And that's what I want to continue to do with my work and also my life. But yeah, I guess that's sort of a good point to end on. But I'd be curious to know your thoughts. That what for you as a digital nomad? What does it mean to be a digital nomad to you? And what does your 2025 look like? But I hope you have an amazing festive season, however you do or don't celebrate. And here's to the next chapter, the next era of taking things a lot slower again. And I hope to see you there with me. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to remote work with you again soon.